really honors the iterative nature of learning. People tell us over and over again, I saw the same thing, the same slide, and I understood it in a new way today. I'm like, I'm finally getting it. It reminds me of the story, no person steps in the same river twice, right? It's not the same river and it's not the same person. So not only do we try and build those longitudinal relationships over time, but also then we check in. We do something called check and connects, where we've got the seminars for the content, but then we've also got a personal connection where we're able to see, what do you think you're learning? That helps us. Like, we do have a scope and sequence for our presentations, but we change them every time based on what you say is happening in schools, what is resonating with you, and what's a little tougher to wrap your head around. So you are influencing us as we're hoping to influence as well. So we've got the seminars for content, the check and connects for that two-way influencing, plus accountability. We're going to be looking at products together and hope that those kind of benchmark our work together. So it's a different model than I had gotten to experience in K-12, and I hope it's richer because of that.
And you'll hear us use the phrase all the way through the process. How do we walk together, making sense of school improvement?
Okay, so the next slide shows the 4 principles of P2P that we will be going through over the whole year. So this is, can someone advance the slides? I don't know that I can. Thank you. So this shows kind of the big picture, and actually this can take years, if not year. So today we'll launch into that first principle, looking at what we think our why is, which is building a culture for learning and ensuring success for everyone. And when we say everyone, we are also very focused on the adults in the building. So students are a primary group of who we serve, but so are adults. And so we try and have that emphasis as well. The second, we look at a conceptual framework, and this is the what we do to change leadership behaviors, to influence beliefs that then build towards a culture for learning. I mentioned I had to go to higher ed because my jokes were too dirty, and Kefi put in the chat that maybe I should have considered going to middle school, which every time I see the action framework abbreviated as AF, I think of you, Kefi. So that's our third principle, is the action framework. And this is the how we do the work. And this is where a lot of professional development starts, with the what do we do, right? The how do we do it? In fact, we have 2 books, and I hope you all have them. And if you don't, put in the chat, we'll make sure you get them. When we wrote the first book, we focused on the why and the what, right? Those first 2 principles that you see, because we found that if those things were not in place, we could scramble with all these hows, all these pieces, all these actions, all these checklists, and none of them were actualized because we didn't have a fertile culture to accept them. And you've probably heard the quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So my dad gets our books and he goes, yeah, those are really nice books, Suzann, but he just read the first one. He goes, but you never told us how to do it. And as an engineer, that's all he wanted. Just tell me how. And I think that's really human nature. Just tell me how. And so I promise you that is the focus of the action framework. Although when we are talking about the why and the what, we'll also talk about some of those belief and behavior changes and give you some behaviors to practice and see see how that impacts your culture. So we start with the why, we go to the what, and then the how, and anchored throughout that last piece there, I'm on number 4, is the leadership planning that's lighting the fuse for all of this. To then, if you imagine getting to 4 and having the little sparks, right? That's going to now back up and light it all up and allow it to actualize and initiate the change process, that you are the pivotal piece in initiating that change process. So those are the 4 biggies that will anchor throughout this year and hopefully going forward. And we're going to get started today with that very first one, a culture for learning. Chuck?
Thanks, Suzanne. Next slide, please. In terms of what Suzanne was mentioning, the why, the what, and the how, what we found if one is clear on their why and the behaviors that support that why, you don't need to do the how correctly. You have to obviously do it more right than wrong, but you can get significant improvement in a school setting if you live your purpose and the behaviors that support that purpose, or your why. And so in looking at this change process, if you will, your why defines your true north, your what are the behaviors that are moving you into establishing that culture. And we are very intentional in using the word culture. In the 70s, the word was climate, school climate. How's your school climate? And that stayed with us somewhat over a long period of time. And what we've realized is climate really defines weather. Sometimes it's stormy and sometimes it's nice. It's kind of a congenial, feel-good approach. But culture means we're engaged in collaborative inquiry, we're problem solving and working differently together. So when we go through today, I want you to think about, when we look at why, having clarity of purpose in terms of, and we define clarity of purpose for leadership in general, about establishing a culture for learning that builds capacity in those we serve. And then we break it down to what do we do to make that happen. So next slide. I know many of you listened to this several times, and as you reflect as SIPs and ESDs, think about and reflect how we might use this material again within our schools. And when you listen to this, think in terms of purpose on the why, and the what are the behaviors we do to support our why. So go ahead and let's play this.
There's no audio with that.
Ronnie, I've got it queued up if you want me to share my screen and try the audio here.
You may need to hit the button for reshare to share my computer audio for it to work.
Ronnie, I don't want to step on whatever you're doing. Did you want me to try?
Suzann, go ahead. I think we're back to the gallery. Yeah.
Okay. I'll try. I'm always a little bit clunky, but let's see. Share sound is on there, and let's see.
How do I know? A lot of people, when they think of the phrase, how do I know, they always want to put the what behind it. How do I know what I'm supposed to do? The question that you really should ask is, how do I know why I'm here? Because when you know your why, your what becomes more clear and more impactful. If you know, like for instance, people know that I do comedy, but that's what I do. My why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. So I can do comedy, I can write books, I can be in a movie, because all of it is motivated by my why. In fact, I have a new web series out called Michael Jr. Break Time. We probably just did the 6th episode. It's on YouTube. So every single Wednesday at 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode on YouTube of Michael Jr. Break Time. What it is it's me. I travel around the country and I do stand-up comedy, in case you didn't know. And in the middle of my comedy set sometime, I'll stop and just talk to my audience. And we've been filming this, and it's, you know, it's pretty cool. So we're in Winston-Salem. I'm gonna show you a clip from Winston-Salem. And I'm just talking to this guy in the audience, and he tells me that he's a musical instructor at a school. So I was like, all right, you're a musical instructor, you know, can you sing? Let me hear you sing a song. So this is what happened at the last episode of Michael Jr.'s Break Time. Check it. So you're a musical director. Cool.
Yes, sir.
All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Wow. That bro could sing, you know what I'm saying? All right. Now, what you give me the version is if your uncle just got out of jail, you got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick, if you know which version I'm talking about. Just see if that exists. Let me see what you got.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I see.
Okay, here's what I want you to catch. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what becomes more impactful because you're walking towards or in your purpose.
I love that last line, and it's on our slide too. When you know your why, your what has more impact because you're walking in or towards your purpose.
So as we look at this, we break down P2P and we come back to our why on a regular ongoing basis of clarity of purpose. So we're continually learning new behaviors that support our why. So P2P grounds itself on learning those new behaviors through the conceptual framework. And through the action framework, the how, we then express it within that context, how those behaviors are expressed within your context. So next slide, please. So we'd like you to just kind of reflect for the next 7 minutes and maybe either write it in sentence format, shouldn't take more than 2 or 3 sentences, or bolted or one-liners, however you think. But from your perspective, from your role, whether it's from the ESD, continuous improvement partner, or as a school leader, what gives your life purpose and meaning? And just take a minute. We're going to give you 7 minutes to do that. And I'm not sure why we said 7. I think when I put 7 in there, I remember when I used to smoke, and that's how long it would take me to have a cigarette. But since that's no longer appropriate, we're going to give you 7 minutes. With that being said, then we'd ask you to list maybe some of the big ideas that you put in the chat room as you go. So please take a moment, reflect, discern, and then apply.
You want the breakout rooms right now? No.
I don't know, it's individual work, so it just on pause, but thank you, Ronnie.
All right, well, they're ready to go when you do decide to have one.
Shall do.
Thank you, Dr. Foster. What a powerful piece you've added to the chat. As other folks are starting to craft their answer to what gives their life purpose and meaning through the lens of their leadership. If you could add a little bit in the chat, that would be appreciated.
About 2 more minutes, and then I'll have some concluding remarks as we move forward to our next slide. Okay, 1 more minute. A few more comments would be great. These are amazing. Okay, thank you. What I appreciate, and I think what I'm reading is, it's about helping people fully develop. We believe at P2P that the human condition in the right culture will thrive, flourish, and make and reach their full potential. As Suzann will share a little while later, we believe that the human condition needs a sense of self-worth, a sense of belonging, and a sense of hopefulness, and a culture that expresses itself that allows to do it. And leadership is accountable in creating a culture that allows people to flourish. And it's about, and so how does that culture emerge and allows for an environment of success for all? So as we remind ourselves, and we'll talk later about writing your purpose statement out with your colleagues and having it define your true north, and what does it look like as I move forward and working with others and those I serve, and to write those statements down and have it as a tool to see growth and change over time within the schools you serve. Next slide, please. So we're going to have a breakout session now. And Suzann, any thoughts, I guess, probably within your ESDs and SIPs. So Suzann?
So if we're about school improvement, improvement is change, right? You can't change something without impacting the beliefs and engaging with the beliefs that are present there. So part of our hopes here today and this year is that we give a space for SIPs to talk about and ESD leads and schools to build a common language and some common thought activities that they're doing together, and so that there is some of that anti-entropy. I saw that in the chat, some more cohesion, and so this would be a great place for SIPs and building leadership to start. So we want to give you just time to kind of practice with each other, maybe before you're doing that with a larger team, around having these conversations. What are my core beliefs that support my why? So if you're able to express your purpose, your why, what beliefs undergird that? And then what are the behaviors that I would see if I walked into your school and saw those beliefs and behaviors aligning? So that's what we're asking you to speak to each other about for the next 10 minutes. And I'm going to turn it over to, or Ronnie, are you doing the breakout rooms?
Yep, they're ready.
Okay. So if you need the PowerPoint up so you remember the questions, you've got it in the Padlet. I know the minute I go into a breakout room, I forget what the questions are. So hopefully you've got that in front of you. And we will see you in 10 minutes.
I got Gail. She's all by herself because Gloria didn't join. Should I put her in with Chuck and Lori?
Manu should have gone with Gail, and
Okay.
then Timmy should go with Conrad in the miscellaneous group.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure where you put her.
She's in that group already, but
Okay.
she didn't join it.
Okay, that's cool. That's
And
cool.
Manu is.
I assume if they're in the wrong groups, they'll bounce back, but it's hard because we don't know who's going to show up. Like, I know we'll get better at this. Obviously, by number 2, we'll have a better
Yeah.
participant list, but
Where's Manu supposed to be? Which one?
189 with Gail.
Okay.
Lori.
I'm back because I'm a team of 1 today.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
There's a miscellaneous group with Conrad. Who
Yeah.
else is? Yeah.
Okay.
Want to put her with Conrad?
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Good to see you.
Thanks.
Excellent. Yeah, so we'll get just more organized. It's just hard to tell who was going to come today and how we were going to run it. So I appreciate it. What I tried to do, Ronnie, and I think it was on Wednesday or something, was to kind of send, and we can do a kind of a run through before, but like, here's the PowerPoint on this slide. We're going to do a breakout. Drop this into the chat on this slide. I know that's a lot to manage. So let's debrief after
No,
today.
it's actually fine. I just wasn't quite ready because between the huddle and this.
Yeah, and we should have, and we won't have a huddle next time. I really thought the huddle would take 15 minutes or so. So yeah, I know we were running. But we'll debrief and say, besides what we did, if we give ourselves 30 minutes next time, is there anything else we want to change? Because Chuck and Suzanne don't like to run the slideshow because they just want to talk. So that puts me on the slides, and then I'm a little clunky in trying to do the cutting and pasting into the chat and the breakouts, but maybe that's too much for one person too. So we can talk about how to do it as a collective, and if we need another person supporting us, we can look for that, so thank you.
You're welcome.
And we got the record going, right?
Yes.
So because there was quite a few schools that couldn't come today, so we wanted to have that have this available for those for the ESD. You're Roosevelt. No, you're in 123. It's just Lori Scott today. It didn't look like any of the schools from 123 came, but Lori went to the miscellaneous group because she said she was a team of 1, but now you're here. So
now I'm a team of 2. I know I'm going to have to pull out again at 10:30 for another half an hour meeting, and then I should be back. And but I'm connecting with Kevin at 12. So I'll get kind of some more information. I know Lori had tried to see if Othello was interested. So maybe she and I can,
great.
Now what is her role in the ESD?
She used to be the lead. I think she stepped down. She stepped down from the lead. She's still working with the ESD, doing the P2P work. So.
As suspected, that I was like mid-sentence. So here's my sentence to everyone. Revisiting my why was particularly important last year during COVID, because we were revising policies at the same time. And I found that we were revising policies that did not align with our organizational why. And there was no place where we all had agreed what that was. So we're going to ask, I'm going to take over the slides here. We're going to ask that be a place that you start. Let's see. Sorry, I'm a little clunky, and I appreciate your grace on this. With your conversations as a team, and that's not unique, right? I mean, you've done that at your convenings, you talked about your values, but what we're asking you to consider doing is when you have this conversation about your core beliefs, your why, and then the corresponding behaviors I would see, sometimes I think that would have taken another maybe breakout just to get to the behaviors. We're asking you to have that conversation with your leadership team and then create a product, create that purpose statement, write down those commitments to this is the belief and the behavior that would correspond. So when you look on the Padlet, there is the roadmap that has all the pieces for today. This is the first suggestion that you do something like this as a team if you haven't already. And you know, it would be really weird if we started out P2P asking you to do something that utterly did not align with the other experiences that you have. You know, when people say, oh, when I went to the convening, we were talking about this too. So P2P is trying to put those things together coherently. So a lot of things that we bring up will be familiar to you. And that's good, right? I mean, some people have said some of this is like no dust stuff. We're like, yes, it should be. Like, none of this is wildly new. We're just trying to put it together in a coherent way. So we're not giving you a checklist when you look at that roadmap, and this is the first thing on it. We're not saying this is as SIPs, you go out, here's the first thing you do. We're saying here's a roadmap that's a suggestion over the next 45 days in your work with school leaders. Are there any questions about that part and what that would mean for you as a SIP or an ESD lead or a school leader?
I would like to add just a couple of comments building on what you're saying, Suzann. I found in the field every time things in the school started getting cattywampus a little bit at hectic times, if you slow the game down, especially in comprehensive schools, of reminding ourselves of the why, the work takes on different significance with staff and our colleagues. And like I said earlier, our belief system is, as leaders, we create a culture for learning that allows us to, as human beings, reach our full potential. And as we move into the specifics of what that means on the what and the how, think about what are we keeping score currently in our state, and maybe what we should be keeping score on what is important in creating a culture for learning. And with that, any other comments from the experience before Suzann starts narrowing in some big ideas around the culture for learning?
Now that I'm running the slides, Chuck, you'll have to tell me if there's chat and those kind of things, because my computer is completely consumed with slides.
Well, you're asking me, I don't know what the proper term is for my abilities, but I will give it my best shot. Let's go to the next slide.
All right. I also can't see the slide numbers anymore, Chuck, so you're gonna have to let me know when it's your turn too.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, you have got the next.
All
right, you're doing awesome.
So here we are into principle one, and this is our why. And so we're appreciative that you started with your why, so we can see where we have these commonalities, and you can see where you resonate with what P2P says is our why. So the focus is on building a culture for learning, and you'll see in some future images that that is at the center of these frameworks. So we use the acronym CBE, connect, build, and envision as the building blocks of how to live your why. So I just want to talk through those. And if you heard these yesterday, I challenge you to think about what that looks like in a school as you're walking into your buildings or working with your teams. What does it look like to do these things? So to create a culture for learning, we believe that it's imperative that we're connecting people to the school. And so that is both adults and students understanding how they fit into the well-being of the school. Because when we understand that fit, that first of all, that we do fit, and then what that fit is, that provides a sense of self-worth. The second one is the B is for build powerful relationships. And this reminds me of something from our breakout group where Bulmaro was talking about the adults and the students having those supportive relationships. And he was talking about how to start moving them back up the other way, like student to adult, not just adult to student. And we have a lot of stories about stuff like that. I was pretty excited to hear it, that we'd love to share from our research. But that is the B in CBE, adults and students at all levels supporting each other in achieving both individual and group goals. And when that happens, we're creating a sense of belonging. And good luck as the school year kicks off and your email inbox fills with school research, what we should be doing to start the year off. Good luck finding something that's not about creating a sense of belonging, right? Then the E is for envisioning a future. Sorry, geez, who's in charge here? And this is where adults and students have a clear understanding and a positive outlook for what their future holds. And that leads to hopefulness. So Chuck mentioned the sense of self-worth, belonging, and hopefulness. And that's what we strive to create by living our why to create a culture for learning. Gloria, I'm not sure, will a new framework be sent for the coach's handbook? Coach's handbook hasn't changed, framework hasn't changed. If you're looking for a link, I can certainly add a link later. Did I misunderstand your question, Gloria?
Sort of, kind of, I miswrote it then. With you, the two of you have shared that there's been a change in the delivery model, the framework, how you're going to do it. I print it and have the initial coach's handbook.
Oh, then you are good to go. Yeah.
I think
So-
oh, go ahead, Gloria. I'm sorry.
I love the way we walk on each other. Go for it, Chuck.
Well, what I'm saying is we're definitely coming in with different ideas in our PowerPoint on how you can use the coach's handbook and the materials and as you work with your SIP. So we may have a bit of a different slant today with some of the activities that are not in the coach's handbook, but will align to what the attempt was when we wrote the coach's handbook.
That's all I'm saying. I like that order. And I'm having to jump back and forth. And I just wondered if it had been redone in a consistent way to match what you're doing. I'm okay. I hear you.
Okay. So if we're living CBE, we're looking at school culture for students and adults. We're building that environment for collaborative process and system improvement. So we think that looks like this when we go out to look and think about through your lens, when you see these things in a school, what does it look like when you see trust at all levels of the organization? Do you know those that you serve and the why behind the work? Are people vested? Are you vested in each student? Does every player have a voice? And have they embraced this idea that we'll talk more about later, where leadership is accountable and staff are responsible? Those are the kind of things we see in buildings that are working towards a culture for learning. So I want to follow up on my question to you. What does that look like in a school? I just listed those factors on the left-hand side. When you think about the schools you're working with, working in, working for, would you say they have a high or low degree of this factor? And then how do you think you know? What's the evidence that you would see in a school where there's trust at all levels? So let's start zeroing in how we perceive a culture for learning by just talking to each other about the evidence that we would see. And so, Ronnie, if you'd be so kind as to put us back into breakouts for 10 minutes. Ronnie, when we come back, are you able to, hi everyone. So we hope it makes sense to start with these conversations. And I'm going to ask you a little bit more about how you see this working at the start of the school year. We've got like 6 more slides and then a break. So thank you for hanging in there with us. I appreciate you taking time to talk about what this actually looks like in schools. And so I'm just adding to that roadmap document that, like I said, is in Padlet. You probably already downloaded it. We're thinking as you team together, school leaders and SIPs, that if you start with talking about that purpose statement and getting it very publicly committed to, that then you can move on to a conversation like this, sharing what you see and hear and the products that are there on site that help you gain insight into the school's current reality of where they are in terms of building a culture for learning. So if you go to the right, like what are the products? We like to be very product driven. You can use those factors that we discussed and see if there's any consensus within the leadership team between you and the principal and the SIP, wherever that conversation makes sense, and the evidence that you're seeing. And then lastly, then what are those behaviors that support CBE with both the students, but particularly the adults as we get started? This is a really relevant conversation as we start the school year. What are the behaviors we're modeling to live CBE with the students in your building? Chuck, anything to add about that?
No, I think as you apply and think and come alongside, use your judgment as it relates to the context of your school and your leadership team and their readiness in terms of the nature of the conversation. It'll lead this work. So again, we're trying to give you format suggestions, but what are the tools or supports your leadership team needs to have to be able to start looking at their school through a different lens, especially being a comprehensive school. I'd also add that at the ESD level, this would be a good exercise, just looking at it through the ESD and within your own organization, different departments, and looking at it through an ESD lens. And how does this apply to what we do? And how does this apply to supporting the SIPs in their work?
Yeah. Did I just come off of the presentation view?
Well, you shrunk it. There.
Jeez. So the reason we think it's important to start this way is because this is one of our guiding beliefs, is that when we demonstrate in that orange bubble the new leadership behaviors that you'll have these discussions about, that's what changes old beliefs and gives leadership a fighting chance in their context, right? To make the change to a culture for learning. So to achieve that positive change, to develop a culture for learning, we believe formal leadership has to demonstrate new behaviors to change old beliefs. And that reminds me of a phrase Liza said in our first breakout, is like showing up with your actions, right? I know that's what I hear, people's actions. So Chuck's going to talk about really what that looks like.
So our intent on the original slide, the initial slides, is to create awareness of learning new behaviors. And so know that as we get into conceptual framework, that's where we will discuss what are those behaviors. And those behaviors are pretty basic, but in terms of creating significant change. And what we saw at the Sunnyside High School and some of the outlier schools that we looked at, and I'm sure you've seen this from CE data, there was a real shift in perceptions of what leaderships were trying to do with these behaviors to engage staff differently with each other in the work. And you can see factors such as trust, integrity, openness, reliability, and caring, and competence. There was a real attitude in general that roughly 50% of the staff didn't see administration leaders working with them in a way that promotes a culture for learning. This shift occurred actually quicker than over those 6 years, but we put a 6 years showing there was some permanency of a change in perceptions of leadership behaviors that promote these things. And as you saw an increase there was also a rapid increase in graduation rate. Now, what was interesting, next slide, was that the shift in attitude between with teachers and staff, with leadership, there was a shift in thinking with each other. And this is really powerful. As leadership modeled the behaviors of a culture for learning with each person, there was a shift on how they treated each other. And I think this is some incredible data where I'm great in ideas, but you're not. Kind of, you can see that there was a real shift in attitude for less of 5% gap, that we moved from me to we, or I to they. Changing my school for the better, you could see the same result, as well as being accountable. And part of P2P is looking about making a culture where people are feeling safe on what they're willing to be held accountable for. Next slide. So in this shift in the culture also was a shift in attitudes and perceptions toward adults. No longer, they saw adults caring, which was disappointing to the staff. Well, what do you mean? We've always cared. But there was a shift in perceptions of attitudes toward adults, and creating an environment. And you can see by this quote, we as an entire high school started to care about our attendance, grades, and graduation. Not only that, but we shared to care about other people too. You could hear people say, come to class, we want off campus, etc. You can get your grades up, you can graduate. These kinds of changes are what were really important this year. It has defined us from the rest of classes that have graduated. We were the beginning of the amazing change, but we're certainly not the end. That was scripted, and it was a really powerful moment. And I guess the bottom line in creating a culture for learning, and as we discussed it, the next part of this is, okay, here's our current reality in our culture. What are those behaviors? What do they look like? How do we inspire a sense of hopefulness? If I change my behaviors, I can alter beliefs about who we are and what we can do. And we don't even need to necessarily do, I'm not saying it's not important, instructional practice or assessments 100% correct, but if our behaviors are in line about how we build the worth and dignity of those they serve in pursuit of better assessments, in pursuit of better teaching strategies, a culture for learning emerges. So when we take our break, we got a break coming up. We'll come back and start dealing on what are those behaviors that support our why. Anything, Suzann?
Aren't we doing this slide before break?
Oh, sorry, probably so. Thank you. You're an awesome teammate.
I think I can't see the presentation anymore because of
Yeah,
my
I remember
presenting
that.
view.
Yeah.
Okay, so we think that could be an additional thing for SIPs to consider, and ESD leads to consider with the school leaders, is to just do that building leader walk and talk and identify and list what you see and hear that deepens your understanding regarding the culture for learning. So literally just getting out with them and doing these activities in that context. And I'm curious, just right before we go to break, if this makes sense for what you're thinking in terms of your work as we begin together. You know, when we put together this roadmap, is that a helpful roadmap that makes sense? And that it might be nice if your fellow SIPs were doing some similar things, and then you could convene and discuss. Can you just give us 2-3 minutes of feedback before we go to break? I see Kate.
Yeah. Well, I guess here's my concern. At this point in time, we're not allowed to travel. And so that is not going to be a realistic, we're going to have to do that a different way. So because like, for example, Roosevelt is quite a distance for me. So, and I know all the other SIPs are looking at the same thing. So we're going to have to adjust accordingly so that we do this via Zoom. I understand it might even be as long as January.
So instead of a walk and talk, it's a Zoom and talk.
It's a Zoom and talk. So yes, yeah, a technological talk. Thank you.
Dr. Foster?
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I was just listening to the audience of who you're addressing. So you're addressing ESD leads, SIPs, and SIPs. And I just also wanted to just bring the audience of state employees, because us at waOSPI, we have a state perspective. So it's not as direct classroom, maybe funding, just a lot more systemic. So bring that to the forefront for you.
I will bring it. Thank you for pointing that out. Yes, when you've got many audiences, that's always my fear. Who am I leaving out? So thank you. Yes.
No.
So this is Gloria. I'm getting some good ahas around this and believing. I'm trying to visualize some of the stuff that occurred over time last year. And what the principals and I did was that we set goals for what we would want to look for doing those Zoom pieces, even though we weren't in school. For a question, for an example, is, before we went out, the English department had agreed to do blah, blah, blah. What are they doing now? And so she and he were able to give some feedbacks and reporting regarding what they were doing, which then allowed another layer of questioning to come in. So if we're not physically there, that works for me just fine. But I think what we need to do is make sure our questions are targeted toward the work that we want folks to be walking in, the direction we want them walking in. I hope that made some sense.
You're here. Yes. I mean, it is so context specific. Dr. Mitchell, I agree that is how people must work, right? You're walking with them, and I appreciate your comments. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to reinforce, there's no one right way to do this. I think the spirit of the intent of what we're trying to do is, it's bigger than test scores. It's bigger than a school improvement plan. It's about creating a culture within your school. And it really begins with you guys developing relational trust with those you're working with in terms of this journey together. So there's no one right way. And that's why I'm going to learn so much from you guys from such a variety of contexts that you'll be working in to make this work.
All right, I'm sure you need a break, and so do I. So let's come back, since we're into this minute, we'll just say 10:11. So we'll give you a chance to stretch your legs, and we'll see you at 10:11. Program go. Is there a screen I can't see, or did we lose him?
I believe that Rick stepped away. He's actually, I believe, going to be being on Mike and my behalf, stepping into the ESD leads and OSPI meeting that was the convening debrief.
Oh, so we were having a fascinating side chat about the science of hope. And I was like, I want to hear more. Okay, well, we'll hear more later, and we'll jump in now that people are starting to return.
And I do see Kevin has joined us on the Zoom.
Okay.
Do we want to change the PowerPoint then, or do we want to?
Nope, stay right where we're at.
All right.
Yeah,
let's do it.
absolutely.
Okay. So if I don't see your face, if I just see a picture, I don't know if you're here or not. Could you maybe just give me a thumbs up? I hate to start without the folks returning. Okay, just move. Oh, thank you. Oh, it's so nice to see your faces. I had such empathy for my K-12 colleagues teaching to black boxes. It just like sucks energy, right? And then seeing your faces just gives it to me. So thank you. And look at the progress we're making. We're already on to principle number 2. Remember, there were only 4. Gosh.
Are you going to tell them we stay on principle 2 for the next 100 years? Oh, I'm sorry.
I wasn't going to say, yeah, now you, yeah. All right, so we're on there. We really work with 2 frameworks, and the first we talk about the what we do, and the second we talk about the how we're doing it. So principle 2, we're focused here on the conceptual framework, which is the what leaders do in creating a culture for learning, so that they can help serve others in an effort, to serve them to be their best selves. So the next slide gives the overview of all the pieces involved in the conceptual framework. So I'm going to briefly talk about each one, but then we're going to linger on the big mama, said the big mama. So the undergirding foundation here is relational trust, and that's a phrase that many of you have heard before. We are going to focus here, and so we'll operationalize those 3 pieces of relational trust soon. So I'm not going to linger on it on this slide. I'm going to say without it, you can't actualize all these other efforts. And so that's why it's a Venn diagram, right? The more we can overlap these, the more you see that little sliver of a culture for learning growing within it. So I'm just going to describe the other 2 that we can come back to another day. What we do is we work to build relational trust. We work to academically press and support learners. So when we talk about academic press, we've got a long history of doing this in our nation, generally only through part of it, however. So if we read the definition, it says provide specific direction embedded in high standards, goals, and a belief of success for everyone. So in the United States, we've got a long legacy of pressing by increasing standards and having these high expectations. I don't know if the corresponding belief of success for everyone has always come along. Certainly that's what's implied by policy names like No Child Left Behind, right? Like they're all going to come along with us. Every student succeeds. So that's press, and you can see a lot of our policy is written around press, academic press. But we know from the research, it's very clear, and I'd like to hit myself over the head with it every year, that if you only press without the supports, test scores go down, right? And we believe that learning is diminished alongside. So there have to be those corresponding supports, those assistance that's provided to help the students meet those goals. So those are the 3 pieces of the conceptual framework, the what we're doing, as we work towards a culture for learning, but we're going to linger on relational trust. So on the
Before
next
you-
slide,
Before you move forward on that, Suzanne, I'd like just to reflect for a minute on the schools we serve and the press that's going on, whether it be COVID or whether it be improved your job academic performance. The press on comprehensive schools and this notion as you're broken, you need to be fixed. And we've sent a message for, do we really believe in them and how do we support them? So think about it through an adult lens as well as a student lens.
okay, so it's easy to say the word trust, and we have obviously added relational trust. And even in my own department meetings this week, we've found that we understand that term very differently. And so we want to share how P2P describes trust, because we think it's one of the 3 core factors. And of the 3, it's the foundational. So I build trust with you when you feel safe with me. You perceive that I have something to offer you, and I put in the time with whatever it is that I have to offer, right? I put in the time with you. So feeling safe, having something to offer, and putting in the time, we believe those are the 3 factors that lead to increased relational trust. So if you can get on board with that kind of definition, I'm wondering then how you think on the next slide, how to build that relational trust between you and your partners. So for example, if it's a SIP and school leadership, if it's OSPI within a department, if it's an ESD lead. And so we're often going to use SIP and school leaders as an example. And so I'll try and mix in more examples in future PowerPoints. But in this PowerPoint, that's the example. What would it look like? What would the behaviors look like between a SIP and a school leader, or a school leader and a SIP, right? How would I know I'm feeling safe? What would it look like for a SIP to have something to offer? And what would it look like for a SIP to be putting in the time? And we've already discussed some of those things. We're hoping that this pilot will help you and your learning partner, whoever that may be, to build that relational trust. And so let's just go a little deeper with this idea, and I hope you'll stick with me just using the SIP and school leader model. So on the next slide, we show that in an image. To build this learning partnership and develop relational trust, we imagine that the SIP has to work to create that mutual safety. But it takes something from the school leader as well, right? They're going to have to drop their defenses, which is easier said than done. The SIP is making time for the school leader, and the school leader is willing to commit. The SIP's got something to offer, and that's why we're trying to put together this roadmap. We're hoping that maybe even we have some common things across SIPs to offer. And the school leader would then be open to those offers, and both are embracing the spirit of service. We are hoping that whether you replace SIP and school leader with other learning partnerships, that we think this is the kind of list that would contribute to a learning partnership. Chuck, do you want to say more there?
No, the next slide will provide the spirit of intent. And again, it depends on your context of how to apply this, because sometimes just jumping into a relational trust activity is kind of awkward. It's also by living it with some of the other activities, whether it be a walk and talk by Zoom, or whether it's conversations around what do you see and hear in your school. That's by doing and modeling it. So we put this activity later, say, what did we experience together as we did these other activities on clarity of purpose, clarity of what it is we want to do for culture. Now let's talk about debrief. What did we do together in this experience that built our relationship? That's the only thing I would add. Now that was our intent of why we built it here. Whether we got it right, that's your context.
Yeah, so after the breakout, after we noodle this together a little bit, we do have an activity that we suggest you do. It's a little more structured, that you and your learning partner can engage with. But let's just start with talking about whether it's SIP to leadership, or if you go down on that slide and you delete all those SIP to leaderships and you're like, I'm an ESD lead with this person, I'm OSPI with that person, whatever your relationship is in there, what kind of behaviors would you have to hold yourselves accountable to? Because remember, in that previous document, we had both coming in. Like there were reciprocal behaviors, like creating a mutual safety and then dropping defenses, right? So if you'll jive with the feeling safe, having something to offer, putting in time, what's the behavior that corresponds to that we can say, I'm going to hold myself accountable to in your context, right? So let's do, and your breakouts can be with people that you don't have a learning team with. I've heard some people say, oh, I don't work with that team, I'm jump out of that breakout. Let's hear what each other has to say, whether you're working directly with these folks or not. What does it look like to put in the time? So Ronnie, can we do 10 minutes to talk about relational trust and these 3 factors, what they look
Got
like
it.
in behaviors?
Kevin Pierce, where do you go with GSD?
Just keep me in this room. I don't need to go in a breakout room. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Then I got Chuck is in one all by himself. There we go. Oh.
Now we have Gloria by herself in 189. Do you want to put me there, Ronnie?
Sure.
I'll go in with Gloria. Could I just hit join?
Yes.
Well, Ronnie, I would presume we are in breakout rooms. Can you put me with EST 105 if that's how we're broken out?
Yes, I will do that.
Thank you very much.
Uh-huh.
Hey, Ronnie, are you there?
Yes.
Who's the audience of this group?
This is the ESD leads and the, what do you call them? So it's OSPI people, it's the ESD leads and a couple of school representatives. We didn't get many schools here yet today.
Okay, all right.
There's just like a handful, maybe 5 from the schools, and the rest are all from ESDs.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Where's Chinook at? Is that a middle school or high school?
Middle school in Kennewick, Washington.
Oh, in Kennewick, cool. That's where my son just moved to in October.
Oh, really?
He's your new local Air Force recruiter for the next few years. And
Nice.
they're loving it over there.
Mm-hmm.
I was just over there last week.
Nice.
So is this one of the new schools out there in the valley, or is this, yeah?
This is a new school that's kind of up on the hill.
Yeah, I drove through there the other day and I could not believe all the beautiful new schools and the houses and everything. It's like a whole new city out there in the valley.
It is. It's growing like a lot of communities. It's kind of shocking how fast it's occurring.
It is truly, because I was over there a couple of summers ago for a public school employees conference and none of that stuff was there.
We opened this school 5 years ago with about 750 kids, and within 4 years we were at 1,000 before pandemic hit.
Wow.
It backed off now. We lost about 100 kids.
Yeah, I worked for 23 years at North Mason High School, and we had about 750 kids pretty steady the whole time.
Yeah.
But I know they lost a lot during the COVID.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering if they're all going to come back, and we are getting some transfers in, but not the number. I think there's still families that are pretty leery about.
Yeah. And some of them, well, probably not so much at the middle school age, but I know high schoolers, some of them, when they left, they have no intention of coming back, And I know I talked to the registrar from my old high school, and she said she just withdrew 80 children last week. 80 kids. That's a lot of kids to withdraw in 1 week.
It's a lot of money out of your
kidding
budget that you're planning on.
Yeah, I'm sure they're not happy about that part. But then there's still also the ones that they never found that just kind of went off the grid when COVID happened. And
that's right.
Some schools did a really good job of finding their kids, and others didn't even really do too much. So it just depends on your district.
It did. I know that we could have done more, but I was so stressed with everything that kind of let my secretaries do their best at making phone calls and trying to.
That's sometimes all you can do, I know Ephrata did a really good job. They had all their paras and the secretaries making phone calls and finding kids. And they had a really tough year up there anyway, because they had 3 student suicides.
Oh, wow.
During COVID, and it was pretty tragic. Yeah, especially in a little town like that where, Yeah,
that's a small community. That would really, I did not know that.
Yeah, 1 at the beginning and 2 at the end.
Yeah, it affected a lot of people. I know that my mental health was not real great. And
yeah, I went through a little bit of that myself for a couple months.
Yep. It's amazing what the lack of structure and I think the other big frustration for all of us is we knew we couldn't do the job we needed to do, environment, and it was just a daily stress. And then on top of that, we were getting just beat up by parents because their frustration was being aimed at us, even though we were powerless. Wow.
Absolutely. I know there was a lot of frustrations going on.
Sure. We're not through the woods yet, but I do feel like I do feel like we've gained some benefits, like a renewed appreciation for a lot of things we took for granted for me. It's helped my attitude a lot.
Me too.
Rejuvenated me a little bit. You would have asked me before pandemic, I would have said, I'll retire right now if I can. I get there's a lot of positive things you get through our careers, what we do with kids, you know?
Yeah. Well, when I moved from the school to waOSPI 3 years ago, I thought it would still be a lot about the kids and all that, but it is so different. And I miss working with the kids so bad. I've been even tossing around going back.
I've had opportunities, at least invitations to consider district office, and I'm resisting it. I'm just resisting it because exactly what you said, Ronnie. It just seems like there's a lot of bureaucracy, and you get really distanced from the real thing that drew us to this career.
Yes. And I loved having the kids that other people considered tough or bad kids, you know, and they would always find their way to me. And I always had a big heart for those kids. And so I always had like my regulars, you know, and even now, just like last weekend, one of them came to visit me that I had like 3 or 4 years ago. She was in my office all the time. And then she's all grown up now, 20 years old. And she stopped by the other day and ended up spending the night. We talked till like 3 in.
Well, that's awesome.
I'll come back and see you later on.
Yeah. What was your position in the high school?
I was the office coordinator.
Gotcha.
And well, for a couple of years, I was counseling secretary, but then I moved up to the front office and I was up there for 20 years.
Well, that says a lot about your ability to form relationships with kids, you know, and that's incredible.
I love working with kids, especially the ones that other people think are bad. Because I don't think there's any bad kids. I think they all have a reason for acting out.
Yeah,
and the ones that are getting loved at home are coming to school to learn, and the ones that aren't getting the love at home, they're coming to school to get love and food and attention.
That's exactly right.
And yeah, you got to see through that stuff.
A lot of times, I like those kids too, because if you treat them with respect, and you don't get emotionally defensive at their behaviors, it's amazing how appreciative they will be to just like a human being. Yeah.
Okay. Well, coming back. I'm gonna mute myself now.
I hope your conversations were as good as mine, as my breakout room. So I appreciate you talking about your perception of the feeling safe, having something to offer and putting in time. And I'm going to transition to Chuck, who's actually going to break it down even further and then provide a little more structured activity if this is a direction you want to go with your learning partner. Chuck, you'll have to unmute.
Okay, we took a number of factors or behaviors from the research on around these 3 indicators of feeling safe, putting in time, and having something to offer. And in a working relationship, we broke it down into those 3 criteria. You have this in, I believe, in the chat room. We also have this same kinds of questions, if you will, or responses around behaviors for both academic press and social support. But under feeling safe, and these are not inclusive, you can add more, take away from, but we thought it might be a place to start your conversations, might be helpful about what are the behaviors we're talking about that support relational trust. And under feeling safe, we have words that encourage me to take risks. And I remember one of the most powerful comments that I heard in a comprehensive school is when a few teachers said, as principals changed their behaviors, that that they felt a release that it was okay to fail, that I was trying this and it didn't work. There was not that threat, I better get this right or test scores were going to go down. So they encouraged risk-taking and self-evaluation, challenges me in a safe manner, respects and draws upon my expertise. These are all behaviors that working one-on-one or in small groups with your staff or within a leadership team that help promote feeling safe. And like I say, there's many more behaviors. Putting in time as allows me putting time and energy to support their work. They come alongside. It's not a prescriptor, but somebody who's walking with me. It's more than a cheerleader as well. You can do it. It's more than that. There's direct support and energy around it. Takes time to solve problems with me. So it's engaging them not in prescriptive, here's what you do, but to build their capacity. And we know from Glickman's work, part of becoming a peak performer is helping others solve their problems, and is there to discuss difficult issues. Provides me with valuable insight that helps me grow and knows my strengths, interests that support the school vision, having something to offer. The reason there's numbers there, later we have a survey, and these are the survey number questions. We encourage you not to use the survey with staff to give feedback of where they perceive leadership, but as a beginning point in your conversations around putting in time, feeling safe, and having something to offer. Next slide, please. And again, it's just what through your conversations, we're not going to spend time on this right now, but how might you use this, and what is the evidence? Again, we like to, what do you see here or outcomes that support your responses? Sometimes it's important to reflect on different people that you work with and where your strengths lie, but give another optional activity for you in the process of springboarding this notion of reflecting our current reality, not only with how those questions would reflect how we work with each other as learning partners or how we work with the staff. Next slide. So Suzann, why don't you provide a little more thinking around the 45-day planning. Eventually we'll be more intentional. What is a 45-day plan? But we're trying to shape that thinking as you build into possible things, possible activities with outcomes and products that support your work. Suzann?
Yeah, we're just trying to structure some common product. We're very much about products so that we can get some traction together. And if our words don't say it, maybe the text will give you clarity. So that's our thinking around products. So this is a more complete version. We've been adding to it step by step as we've been going this morning. We started with talking about the purpose statement and posting it, discussing with your learning partner the factors of a culture for learning and CBE, and if you can be together on site, doing a walk and talk around that. And if not, well, it's a Zoom and talk. And so we also want to give you the Relational Trust survey so that you can talk about how you're going to live these factors of feeling safe, having something to offer, and putting in time, because a learning partner does need to be able to build up to the ability to challenge you safely and solve problems with you. And right, and there is some reciprocity in that. And so that's why we use the word relational trust. It's not like I can go out and go build trust. No one can go build trust by themselves. It has to be with others. So the last thing on this list is sharing your perceptions and how you think others would respond to that survey about you and why. So that could be a really vulnerable conversation and a great way to to kick off the year, these first 45 calendar days. So that document is either already on your computer or waiting for you in the Padlet.
Next slide then, I think. So one of our first leadership lessons in our book, it is our first actually, not one of, it's our first. And I think Suzann called it the Mama one, biggest lesson. And Covey would say it's the mother habit. I think he calls it actually I can't remember what he calls it, but it's his first habit, calling seek first to understand before you can be understood. I think a lot of people say as soon as we do one-on-ones, they know what it is and I can do this. I think over time, we hope, and maybe a lot of you are already doing it, you're doing it at some level, but what does this really mean and how do we use it and how do we apply it of a foundational behavior? It is that we call it the connective tissue of building self-worth, sense of hopefulness, and a sense of self-worth, and the conceptual framework. So today our intent is only to, I guess, review our current reality or understanding what is a one-on-one. We've got a colleague who, Kevin Pierce is going to join us, and who I think will tell his story well. Kevin is an outstanding leader who is reflective, and I think he has some keen insight to what it's all about, and will share his story when he joined this process. Next slide. I want to go over some of the big ideas of what is a one-on-one. It's only, again, our intent is to introduce this concept of what we mean by it. And then Kevin will share how he has applied it. And then we'll return to this almost in every P2P presentation, because the beginning point of building relational trust and living the conceptual framework, they're inclusive and they're ongoing and they build over time. They're not one and dones. In fact, I know some of you will, they're short, but I tried to have one-on-ones with a staff of 100 at least 2 to 3 times a week and so they're very intentional. It's a form of action research. It's gaining perceptual data, which in reality is how your culture is operated through, is your perceptual, people's perception. And from that data, it's a shared vision to connect people to the school, and it builds relationship, because not only are you listening to them, you're finding common ground. It's influencing you as you connect them to where you think you want to go. It influences you in your planning process. It influences how you behave, and it gives them a sense of voice because it moves to action. It responds that something different tomorrow based on what happened today. And so it's more than just a conversation. It's actually collecting evidence and looking for themes and patterns and applying it over time, not only in your planning process, but how you behave. We say in our book, you should never be surprised, and they should never be surprised in group meetings. If you're coming in with difficult, there should never be a surprise in the school because of the one-on-ones. And it's the beginning point that allows the conceptual framework to come alive. So again, our intent is to introduce it and give you an activity that starts jump-starting it with your work in the field or at the ESD. So next slide. And Suzann, before we go, is there anything before Kevin tells his story to add clarity to what my spirit was and what I was trying to communicate on one-on-ones from your lens?
Yeah, so Kefi, I'm glad you asked for an example. In the past, we have role played this. We've got a whole other document about one-on-ones, and we're really going to get into them in a future session. But we brought Kevin here to talk about his examples. So I think this is perfect timing for your question, Kefi, because, and I think it was Gloria who said this, maybe it was someone else, I'm sorry if I misattributed. We hear the same words, but we hear them differently. So one-on-ones, That's a familiar term, right? I think I know what a one-on-one is. I believe we have a more specific bent on a one-on-one. And so today is just kind of an introduction, and then we'll drill down into that specificity next time. But I really think hearing Kevin, who has embraced them in his own practice and had an impact because of that, is going to be a great start. Kevin, why don't you take it away?
Thanks, Suzanne. Thank you, Chuck and Suzanne, for inviting me to come here, guys. I really appreciate it. And I hope I do represent you guys well, because your work is incredible. First off, guys, I'll introduce myself. I am Kevin Pierce. I'm on my 30th year in Kennewick School District. And I've all of it at the middle school level. I was a 13-year teacher, and I've been an administrator for 16 years, 3 years as an assistant and 13 as a middle school principal. For 7 of those years, I was principal of one of the lowest socioeconomic schools. It was my first principalship. And I walked into that in early 2000s with the state school improvement process being brand new and kind of being laid out on it. In fact, Mary, it's good to see you. Mary was one of my coaches throughout that 7 years and worked with me in a variety of capacities. Because as you guys know, you've probably all been involved in that at the same time I was. Every year it seemed to change. In fact, I had to go to the internet and look up what SIP means, because that's a new term for me, a continual improvement partner. I don't think that term was there when I was in school improvement process. Anyway, I will tell you that 7 years I learned a ton, and we did great things, but it did burn me out. It just was a lot, especially for a new leader and somebody like me in a new leadership position. And so when they built a new middle school, I kind of jumped at the opportunity of opening a new school. So I'm at a school that's only 5 years old. Now, I will tell you that one of the reasons I chose to do that was to get out of the school improvement process. I won't lie to you. So I kind of took a break from it, doing the school. And then we had an opportunity. Our federal programs said, hey, we've heard of this really interesting framework, Powerless to Powerful. And one of our high school principals said she'd been in it a year and said, this is good stuff. And I knew that I needed to do something. Our school was stagnant. And even though it was brand new, I knew that there was things that we could do better. And so I'm always up for new ideas. I'm here to talk about one-on-ones. There was a point, I've only been in it, full disclosure. I've been part of Chuck and Suzanne's, following them for a year now. And of course, last year was a crazy year. So at the same time, I'm hearing all this stuff. There was a lot of distractions and contextual stress that we were all under. But there was a point, there was one of the sessions that we did where they brought a young principal in from Pasco. And he talked about this. That was the first time they introduced this term one-to-one. And we all know that talking to our teachers is important. In fact, it was part of our work in our school improvement, but it was described in such an intentional way that something clicked in my mind. I remember being in that meeting, Chuck and Suzanne, when that young principal said, you know, I found that talking to my teachers in a real disciplined manner, meaning that you make sure and get that done. I found doing it once a week wasn't enough. I needed to do it twice a week. And it kind of shocked me. I was like, you talk to your teachers one-on-one twice a week? I can't, there's times I go weeks without seeing my teachers. And especially in the context of remote teaching and then hybrid, it was an aha moment that I realized that everything that the work on improvement sits upon that relationships with your teachers. So as soon as we got back fourth quarter, I made an attempt to get in and see my teachers. It's not easy. And I wasn't very successful as I started, but I started understanding through doing it, the power that comes from those conversations. I wish that I would have done that in those 7 years at my previous school, because I could see where there was so many issues that I was confronted with that would have been dealt with at a very minor level with staff. And I would have gotten a lot more buy-in from some of the disgruntled staff that you just, you contend with all through this process. Anyway, the last quarter, I started just planning out where my teachers' prep times are. I put it on my calendar, and I would just spend 1 or 2 days a week. I'd blow my calendar out and I'd get in, and you focus those one-on-one conversations around 1 or 2 particular questions on your 45-day plan. And then I started realizing, talking to 50 teachers in a short period of time, your mind you can't keep all that track. So I started carrying a notebook with me, and I would just jot down a few words to help me remember their perspective and some of their comments. The second thing too is I started listening more. It's almost therapy for them, especially during COVID and coming back from that. And I realized that I really needed to understand their perspective without defending or explaining. Sometimes teachers want information, and that's just part of the process. But it's a different type of interaction with your staff that's unique, honestly, if you do it in an intentional manner. So anyway, I've got like different tips on things that I have like goals for this year. I come out and basically tell my staff up front, I'm going to see you at least once a week. You're going to talk with me. What I noticed last year is that the more I did it, the shorter they got. Chuck and Suzann and I talked a lot about that. If you're doing them infrequently, let's say you do it 2 or 3 times a month, they'll have a lot to say, and it will take a lot of time. So that's a tip, basically. As the last month of school, where I was getting it done more consistently, they got shorter, and people could start relying on you to come by. And so they would be prepared with questions, and they'd have things. I will tell you that 2 years ago, we have something in the contract where teachers at the middle school level get to vote on whether you do advisory. And advisory is now, we're kind of shaping advisory into a support system. And I'm really excited about that. But the year before COVID, our advisory vote by teachers, it needs to be passed with 80%. It failed with 78% saying yes. Very frustrating. We voted again, and I got 81%. So one person changed their mind because the principal threw a fit. I did. I kind of had a tantrum. I will tell you that we voted last year after my one-to-ones. I'd done a whole month of them, and we had 94% vote yes. And part of my one-to-one conversation was what's working well with advisory and what's not. And I believe I had a much clearer understanding of the teacher's perspective about advisory. So it was able for me to make some commitment on how that might change the following year. But those are the kind of things that at my previous assignment, we were constantly doing new things or trying to improve processes. Without the one-on-ones, they were just so much more challenging to get collective buy-in. So I hope my overzealous attitude isn't turning you off at all, but I've been through this process a lot. And I think the reason that I'm just so excited, besides the fact that COVID has really helped us become a lot more appreciative of things we took for granted, but I love their framework. And I just wish it's kind of the simplicity of the way that you've packaged all this together and this systemic process that you're doing, and the fact that you're bringing people together as a team. It's really unique in all my previous school improvement stuff. So anyway, I am a believer, and I can't wait to get better at this, because I'm very much of a newbie when it comes to you guys' work. But anyway, that's my story. Questions? Was that
Kevin,
good?
That was more than good, Kevin. I have a couple questions just to draw it out a little bit deeper.
Okay.
What I heard was it was intentional.
Hmm.
It was to share a vision and see if you got it right. So it's like you were leading without controlling. That means you had ideas and based on that, you also said it influenced your 45-day plan and your actions. Can you just talk very briefly how that voice and being influenced affected climate, culture, morale, that they had a voice in the process? You made it evident, I think. How did that impact morale or your culture?
I'm so glad you said that, because that was something I meant to talk about. It slowed my decision-making down some, because what I recognize is that if you go too fast with some of these important initiatives, you lose folks. So by working with you guys, and kind of recognizing that, okay, on my 45-day plan, I want to do this by this time, but I can't just unleash this on the staff at a staff meeting. That's one of your guys' golden rules. And I get why now, because I need to give staff time to process, and it needs to be something done with them, not to them. Nobody likes stuff that affects your own job to be done to you without your input. So your 45-day plan really is those one-to-ones are integrated in there to know, are we ready for this? And go back to your 45-day plan if you're not, and back the dates up a little bit. This is a long process, right? We're talking years to get where we need to go. Does that answer it, Chuck?
Yeah, I'm wondering, one of the things I found in this process is when you get up and there are no surprises, they'd say, well, why is Kevin so smart? So obviously, in making those changes, or why is Chuck so smart? So I guess what I really want to reinforce, it was evident that they influenced your thinking versus selling something. You had a clear vision, but vision is messy, right? On how to get there. What we want to do added clarity, but the how is where teachers are having valuable insight. I suspect when you gave the powerful example of the advisory process and you got 94%, they influenced how advisories got rolled out and how it was operational. It wasn't that advisories were bad, but how do we implement it? Would that be fair to say, or did I miss it?
There's been one-to-ones to where I go there looking to define the vision based on the experts that are doing the job, without a doubt.
Right on, right on.
I mean, a lot of these folks are a lot stronger teachers than I ever was.
Right on, right on. I'm going to defer to the group on, and this isn't art. And, you know, let me ask you one question, because we encourage people to go back and write up the themes and patterns of what they hear. When do you take your notes? During the meeting, after the meeting?
I've done both. I've done both, Chuck, and it's still very much in practice. I struggle with it a little bit because I do want those conversations to be natural, and they often are, you know, where I'm not writing everything down.
Yeah. That's good. What I really want to reinforce, what makes this Action Research 101 is you got a semi-structured question you begin with your thinking, and this takes time, and then not just isolate, once in a while it's putting out a fire with the one person, but you're bringing back their perceptions and looking for themes and patterns. Like, for example, a building principal in a comprehensive school in their first 101s, they asked, what can I do better in leading you? Here's what I'm trying to do. He heard lack of follow through and playing favorites. That was his themes. And so those themes and patterns, I'm sure you had themes and patterns on student advisory. That's what you're looking for. What are they collectively telling me? So you lead to the norm and manage the exception, if you will, and work with the exception. You don't forget the outlier, but it tells you what to do with the outlier. So I really want to stress the notion of action research, collecting evidence, look for themes and patterns, and then what will I do differently to lead that process?
I think Mary had a question or comment, and then Anne.
I had a question and a comment. My comment is, I worked with Kevin for those 7 years he was at that comprehensive school, and he was an outstanding principal, and he turned that place around in a huge way. But I think this P2P work is an example of when I know better, I do better. And I'm really looking forward to doing this work. And part of the reason that I really bought into it, Kevin, was because you were endorsing it, and I thought if you liked it, I like it.
That's nice.
But I do have a question. When you first brought this back to your staff, how did you bring it back? Like, what did you do to introduce this whole idea of P2P and particularly one-on-ones?
I really talked very little about it. I just told them that I was really honest and upfront in the sense that I feel like as a leader, I've become too complacent with improvement, and that's not who I want to be as a leader. And so I found this program, or this framework. I kind of talked up Chuck and his experiences and the fact that they were two Gonzaga professors. And so everybody loves Gonzaga, right? And that was pretty much it, Mary. I just talked about how one of the things that they are really encouraging is that I get around and talk to teachers. And so that's what I'm going to do. And that's what I did. And I started talking about our 45-day plan. And I made the commitment to show them that on a consistent basis, that these are the next steps for us to do. And I would really like input from it. And that's it. And I realized that if I said anything more, it's not going to mean anything unless I do the behaviors to back it up. And if the one-to-ones are occurring like I promised them it would, they'll kind of know I'm serious about this. Otherwise, it's just one more thing that's flying by and it doesn't really impact them. But when they saw me sitting in front of them on a consistent basis, really wanting to hear them, that's communicating more than anything else, right? You're really actually showing them that I care about you, care about the job you're doing, and I want to support and be with you in that work. And it's just a systemic repeating process. And I love the simplicity of it. It's still hard work. But, there were times, Mary, in that school improvement process where you had so many plates up in the air, right? And it's unsustainable, guys. At least it was for me. You just burn yourself out with all the committees and all this and that.
Kevin, Ann Gallagher asked, how long are your one-on-ones typically?
I let the teachers talk. And sometimes I will tell you, one of the things that I talked to Chuck, Suzann, and Kevin Foster when he was with you guys, I found them kind of stressful and exhausting in the beginning because my clock is running in my head, and I want to get them done. And I want to check them off, and it's my personality. But I have to let the conversation, I can't, if I'm rushing them, that just conveys to them that this is more going through the motions. I will tell you they got shorter, and people understood over time that I was trying to get to everybody. And so I typically, in my school, I have about 4 to 5 people every period on prep. So in a 45-minute period, I try to get to all of them so I can get them done in a day.
Yeah, I want to reinforce, unfortunately, we teach things in a linear way, but P2P is a holistic model. And leadership lesson number 3 talks about how time is golden. And a lot of times you're going to hear, I don't have time for one-on-ones. I got to do this. I got to do that. I got to do this. Sometimes leaders fail from what I call heroic leadership. When they do a one-on-one, they want to have the answers versus doing one-on-ones to put the spotlight on the right problem to engage people in problem solving. One-on-ones is just that, collecting valuable information to make sure I have the spotlight on the right problem and engage the people in problem solving. And we'll talk more about that over time. So I'm hearing advisory as a problem. Here's the intent of advisory. What have I missed? Now I'm engaging in problem solving. And as I collect that information, it allows me then to ask the right questions so teachers can work differently together and help me solve those problems. I don't care if it's a management issue or a leadership issue. Intentional one-on-ones of what I'm trying to do and what have I missed. What I'm trying to do is working on a vision. Do I have the right thing? Yes, but how I'm going about it often is how I engage people in that work. And their wisdom, and Kevin, you said it, the closer they are to the floor and doing the work versus I'm leading that work, they're going to influence the structures and the systems you put in place to support them in that work. I don't know if that's clear.
I want to add one thing to that too, Chuck, because prior to this one-to-one concept, in my mind, my influence really was about getting in and evaluating instruction and being in classrooms a lot through that lens. I know that's still an important role for principals, but I've also recognized I was able to hire a instructional coach, and she's a phenomenal teacher. And I'm starting to understand that my influence may be greater through one-to-ones than actual critiquing of instruction. And what I can do for this school is probably, I need the specialists in there helping teachers get better at their craft. But I also recognize I've been out of the classroom a long time, and that my influence can be through these one-to-ones, and they probably should be elevated priority-wise because of that. Those are things in my mind.
And we've found over time, Kevin and P2P, that the real influence around instructional practice is collaborative, doing the same thing at the grade level content, collaborative inquiry versus, which we have a different twist than PLCs, but the real influence is teacher to teacher on instructional practice.
Yes.
So well said, because it's not about fixing them.
Right.
Shoot, our intent was to introduce. We're going to talk deeper each time. I think, Kevin, we may have you come back each time for a while as we dig deeper in this.
Hey, while we've still got him, I think Ron has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ron, you bet.
Well, I just have a question for you, Chuck, and Kevin also. And that question is very simple. So when did the surprises stop?
Well, I can tell you for my experience living this, they stopped very quickly. In fact, I knew I was doing it right because they lined up at my door wanting to talk to me before school out of frustration or transparency. And so the more transparent and vulnerable, it happens really quickly with a few outliers. And those are the outliers, are the ones you spend more time with to make sure you understand what their fears or phobias are. So for me, it was fairly quickly in terms of being surprised on coalition formations and or saboteurs or passive aggressive behavior because I'm doing it to them versus with them. And I will stop things and call, and again, we're getting it. When I see there's smoke in my one-on-ones, we develop what we call action teams, and we talk about action teams in our book. They're not committees, they're short-term. Houston, we got a problem. I'm hearing these grumblings. So that's probably a longer answer than you thought, Ron, but it's fairly quickly.
I want to add, Chuck,
if you move on what they're telling you, if you do idle discussions without action, you're screwed.
Yeah. And I'm glad you said that, Chuck, because that was one thing I wanted to say that I didn't too. One thing that developed was that I found that talking to some of my teachers was very easy because we have a history with friendship. Some of my teachers were more, and what that looks like inside yourself is, oh God, there's just a little bit of like, I got to go talk to this teacher. We don't see eye to eye on some things. What I found is those are the ones I always have to do, always. If I'm feeling a little uncomfortable, not uncomfortable, but it's just a natural relation. There's just certain people you click with, right? I will tell you that I sent Suzann and Chuck a really nice email and I said, because I got done my first time, I got all my one-on-ones done in a pretty short period of time. And I tell you what, I went home that day feeling like I was a good leader. And I just felt a connection to my teachers that I don't normally feel. And I just sent them an email and just said, you guys, I want you to know I just did this and I get it. I understand. For the first time, I'm going home feeling like, okay, I didn't get all this other stuff done, but I did what was important. Because I felt like I knew my staff. I knew where they were coming from. That's powerful.
You know, your feelings toward your teachers or your staff, those you kind of comfortable with or not, are the same feelings teachers have with their students if they're real. It's all of us have those that are real. And anyway, we're introducing it today. We can talk a long time about this. I hope we answered your question, Ron.
Thank you so much.
Well, Kevin, you're definitely going to be back next when we go to modeling and role playing. You hit
Thank you, Chuck. I'm gonna practice this, and I would love to share because I'm still a baby in this thing. So I would love to share my growth. I would love to. Thank you guys for your support.
Thank you.
Okay, nice seeing you guys.
Take care, bud. Well, if we can go back to the slides and we'll bring it home here. I don't know how we're doing it, Suzann, but we're actually right on time. It's kind of a minor miracle. Next slide, please. So, one before that. There should be one before. Yeah, you go. Thank you. Again, the book is written linear, but it's holistic in nature. And Kevin got into 45-day planning, which we're going to do much more of. We have something called systemic goals that help the planning process, that helps your one-on-ones. But to help jumpstart this understanding of what are one-on-ones, there's there might be nice to do a book share with each other. And this works at any level, whether it's SIP, ESD, whatever. But 25 to 32 gives kind of the big ideas of what we're attempting to do and a safe place to start in practicing it. And page 29 and 30 tells you some basic ideas of how to go back and try one-on-ones with staff. If they get at the chapter 3 talks about the use of time. And if a leader gets hung up on time and how do I make time, that chapter may help them think about how do I use my time as a leader. A lot of times, at least for me, I know, I found myself doing a lot of busy work because it was safe and known, even though it was yucky. Well, I got to do the budget. I got to do this. I got to do that. I got to deal with a difficult parent. A lot of times it was an excuse from doing the work that I didn't know how to do because I was scared of it. And so I built it by avoiding the real work of working with people differently. So how you come alongside and make this feel safe and how you go about doing it, this may be a jumping point of starting it. And as we do our first check and connect, I would love to hear more about how you're applying some of these ideas and how it might shape our next seminar together.
Chuck, there's a great question in the chat. Do you envision SIPs accompanying principals when they do one-on-ones, or is it better for them to go on their own?
100% in my lens, and I could be wrong, from my lens, they do it by themselves. You come alongside them and listen to what they learn, help them organize their thinking, and help them be courageous enough on how to answer difficult questions. I did a one-on-one in a building the other day after they did it for a while, and this teacher decided she felt safe to tell me in front of the principal what a complete poor job he did in his one-on-ones with them, because he wanted me to do what I call auditing his work. Not sure where I'm going with that story, but that principal took it so well and saying, okay, what can I do differently? Modeled it right on the spot, diffused everything. So I think I guess what I'm saying is to do it by themselves and then come back and share their victories. Start where they're comfortable and rehearse with them what it could look like with a difficult teacher. Rehearse, but by themselves. Any other questions or thoughts?
This is Dixie, and one thing I want to remind folks is we are recording today. And so if it helped to even, besides sharing the book and the written content, maybe even showing that little excerpt from Kevin just now, if that helped you in your, I don't know, framing of this, or even some of the content we provided today. So remember that you can use this as a resource as well.
Yeah, thank you, Dixie. And this is Dr. Tammy Foster. So I was just putting a couple comments in the chat box. Y'all had me sold with action research. And so I just recently finished school myself, and my methodology I used was action research. And so just really a couple new key kind of components to action research is about involving the researcher and then going away from that traditional research of biased nature to actually addressing biases and positionality, and being realistic about how your biases can influence your research, your experience, your data gathering, and things like that. So if you could speak a little bit more to the action research side, maybe at a later time. I don't know where we are in terms of time.
That is a great question, because you're talking about the trustworthiness of your data, right?
That's right.
And when we get into systemic goals and how we triangulate that data to ensure that we're trustworthy in what we're doing, because part of it is having our leadership teams, other people going out collecting similar data. We talk about auditing our data in a way that, is it real? Anyway, yes, I hope we build on that, and your currency and relevancy will probably help us grow as action researchers ourselves. So you brought up a ton of neat stuff. So as we build on it, we want to make sure it's trustworthy. That's why we say go back, and the beginning part is write up what you've heard from all stakeholders to be looking for themes and patterns and categories what are they telling me and what are the outliers? But that's the only beginning point of knowing whether your data is trustworthy. Did that frame it okay? Or maybe you probably know more about action research than I do. So if there's anything I
I
missed.
just say thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. We used to use the word reliability. The real thing in terms of the data we're doing is trustworthiness of our information. With that, Suzann, bring it home.
All right, next slide, and then we'll give you all a chance to talk to each other instead of listening here. So this is the last time I'll throw this up there, and I know by now the font's getting pretty small, and that's why I started, we started early on putting it one line at a time, right? Was starting with your purpose statement. These are things that you can consider doing with your learning partner, and so we've added one bullet at the bottom now. The last one, deepening your understanding about one-on-ones and maybe even coaching each other, practicing with each other, trying it out with each other and talking about results after, reading a little bit more and feeling comfortable. So this document is fully editable, the one that's on your Padlet. And we expect that you, in the next 45 days, are doing more than, of course, than is on here, but maybe not everything that's on here. It's very context driven. It's what works for you and your learning partners. But we would appreciate you being product driven. And so if you have a product like this, in our check-in connects, when we get to speak with you in between seminars, if you could bring your, we're calling it a 45-day plan, but it's just a version of what you've been doing in these first 45 days of schools. You could bring a version of this for us to have common ground and talk about what you've engaged with in terms of P2P and what products, actions, results have occurred because of that. So we hope that's a helpful thing. We hope you're not seeing it as a to-do list, a checklist. And we hope you are also hearing that we're honoring your context in what happens between now and our next, I shouldn't say our next seminar, between now and our check-in connect. So we don't even wait that long. So to that end, let's just talk about what that might look like between now and our next touch point. So on the next slide, we want to give you a little bit longer breakout time with your learning partners where we can kind of just recall the fact that we discussed, like, let's just talk about where have we been today? Clarifying my why, fostering a culture for learning, the conceptual framework, especially through the lens of relational trust, and the behavior of one-on-ones. So those are the things we talked about. We noted some activities to support those in that 45-day plan. So between you and your learning partners, just start to discuss and maybe calendar, how does this look for you? And Dixie, do we have time to do a full 15-minute breakout and then just come back and say thank you and goodbye before our next? Or do we need to?
Nope, that works for me.
Okay, so you're discussing and calendaring what's happening between now and the next time we see you. It'll be a 15-minute breakout, and it looks like Gloria needs to get moved to the 121 group.
Okay, so we're going to go to breakouts. See y'all back here in 15 minutes.
So that leaves Lori alone.
I'm here, so Lori and I can connect.
Okay, and I got Kate alone also in one. Oh no, she just got Romero in there. Anne, did you want to go in with Lori?
Yeah, I'll go in with Lori since we're both at 123.
And Manu, which one are you supposed to go into?
189.
Yeah. Thanks, Dixie.
Sorry, I wasn't answering. So Gloria went to 121, Manu. So I don't know if you want to go into 121 maybe?
Can you pull her into my one?
Yeah, can you pull Gloria into 189?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dixie.
Sure, thank you.
Kathy, which one do you want to go into?
I don't think my folks are here, so I can go anywhere.
Okay, you want 189 or 123?
Let's go with 123.
All right. Yeah, they're a little more even.
Yeah, that looks great. That looks great. All those three folks that aren't bouncing over have been assigned. I think Anne is actually logged in twice, so I think she's okay. Great day. Let me look at our PowerPoint really quick.
I mean, it might be.
Dixie, if you put up that last slide, maybe we could do some of those closure conversations about dates and what happens next. I know this only has the next seminar date, not the next check and connect date. So maybe that's something that you want to speak to before folks run away.
You bet. Thanks, Suzanne. Yeah, I just want to remind folks of next steps and a little bit about how we see the seminars moving forward. So thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciated the school leaders that were able to join us, and you ESD leads and our continuous improvement partners couldn't do the work without you. The plan now is on September 14th at 11 o'clock. You'll be getting an invite if you haven't already for a check-in with Chuck, Suzanne, you as continuous improvement partners and ESD leads to talk about how it's going. So you've kind of put together a little plan. We're just going to check what's going well, what are your barriers, and just do that learning together. And then we come back together again for seminar number 2, 8:30 to noon on October 15th. And that will include Chuck, Suzanne, myself, the OSSI liaisons, the ESD leads, the continuous improvement partners, and the school leadership teams that are going to be part of the pilot. So we anticipate as we have conversations, we will have leadership teams with us in seminar number 2. So as you get your schools lined up to participate, if you'll let me know who that is, I'm building out a spreadsheet. I will get the meeting invites to them directly. You can forward them as well, but I'm trying to create a master list of who is participating in the pilot so that we can, if you would like me to be responsible for forwarding those meeting invites onto them, we can get events for the whole rest of the year on people's calendars, knowing that everyone's really, really busy. So are there any questions about September 14th at 11? Who participates in that and what the purpose is? And then our seminar number 2, October 15th, 8:30, purpose of that, and who attends. All right. You can always reach out to myself, Ronnie, Chuck and Suzanne if you have questions. We are here.
The only thing I'd reinforce on those check and connects, any products that you can bring in terms of your current reality, what you're trying to do, But more importantly, as you do that, how have you made sense? How have you made sense of the work, and how might you apply that work in the field to help us be better understanding of how we adjust our information of the P2P principles? We're still always thinking of better ways. How do we want to present the concept in a way that makes sense, but at the same time, how do you apply it? And you will know best how to apply it with your leadership work that you do in your context. So please bring your ideas or feedback along the way with your products.
Chuck and I will stick around if there's any questions. Meanwhile, just thank you for coming on this journey with us. Like I said in the chat, you're a great group to travel with.
And Ann, if you want to join in on that, maybe we can set up a time at that time too.
Again, also want to thank you all. It is inspiring work, and I am so excited for what we're going to be able to do together. I feel like if we're in it together, and we can really take this learning opportunity as a chance to inform our continuous improvement work at OSSI, your work at the ESDs, learn from you as continuous improvement partners, and create, this synergy. I think it will serve us all. And thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Likewise, thank you.
Thanks.